In the late 1960s, a young woman named Reyna Angélica Marroquín came to New York from El Salvador, looking for the same thing that has drawn people to America for generations: a future. She was in her 20s. She found work at a factory called Melrose Plastics, a company that made artificial flowers, and she settled into the life of a young immigrant in a new country. She had a friend named Kathy Andrade. She had plans and time and everything ahead of her. Reyna had left El Salvador and crossed into a country where she did not have family waiting, where the language was not her first, and where she would have to build everything from nothing. She took a job making artificial flowers, delicate imitations of the real thing, assembled on a factory line. She was young, she was far from home, and she was doing what millions of people before her had done, trading the familiar for the possible. What she did not know was that she had also stepped into the orbit of a man who would end all of it, and then hide what he had done so completely that the world would not learn her fate for 30 years. This is the story of Reyna Marroquín, told the right way, forward, from the beginning, as the life of a real person, and not just as the mystery she was eventually reduced to. The man who ran Melrose Plastics was named Howard Elkins. He was married, established, a businessman with a comfortable life, and at some point, he and Reyna began an affair. For a while, it was a secret, but secrets like that have a way of growing heavier. Reyna became pregnant with Howard Elkins' child, and a pregnancy is not something that stays hidden. It is a fact that announces itself, month by month, and eventually forces a decision. By the time Reyna was heavily pregnant, close to full term, the situation had reached a breaking point. She made a choice that any person in her position might make. She reached out to Elkins' wife and told her the truth about the affair and about the baby. It is worth stopping on how alone Reyna was in that moment. She was a young immigrant woman, pregnant and unmarried, in a time and a country where that carried enormous weight. The man responsible was her employer, married, and far more powerful than she was. She had almost nothing to fall back on except the truth. Telling his wife was not cruelty. For a woman in her position, it may have felt like the only honest move she had left, a way of forcing a man who wanted to keep her hidden to admit that she and the child existed at all. For Reyna, that was a step toward honesty, toward forcing the situation into the open. But for a man like Howard Elkins, a man who wanted his comfortable life to stay exactly as it was a threat. And the people around Reyna would later say that after she made that call, she grew afraid of him. She had good reason to be. Sometime in 1969, Howard Elkins killed her. The cause of death, established decades later from what remained, was blunt force trauma to the head. Reyna Marroquín, a young woman roughly 9 months pregnant, was struck and killed by the father of the child she was carrying because her existence had become inconvenient to him. And then, Elkins was left with the problem that every killer in these stories faces: what to do with the body of the person he had just erased. His solution came from the world he knew best. His business dealt in plastics and artificial flowers, in manufactured, lifeless imitations of real things. And there's a bitter irony in what he did with that knowledge. He took a 55-gallon steel drum, the kind of industrial barrel that would not draw a second glance, and he placed Reyna inside it. Then he filled the drum with polystyrene pellets, the small plastic beads used in his own trade. Investigators would later conclude that he did this for a specific, chilling reason. He intended to seal her up and sink the barrel in the ocean, and the pellets would help weigh it down and hold it under. A man who made his living turning plastic into fake flowers tried to use that same plastic to make a real woman disappear. But he had made one miscalculation. Once it was packed and sealed, the barrel was simply too heavy. He could not move it to carry out his plan. So Howard Elkins did the next best thing. He hid the barrel in the crawlspace beneath his home in Jericho, New York, a quiet suburb on Long Island, and he left it there. Now imagine living like that. Howard Elkins went on with his comfortable life. He kept his marriage, he kept his business. He walked around inside a home that had a sealed steel drum in the crawlspace, a barrel that held a murdered woman and her unborn child, a few feet beneath his own floorboards. And he lived that way, day after day, apparently untroubled enough to keep doing it. For Reyna's world, meanwhile, she was simply gone. A young immigrant woman, far from her family, who dropped out of contact and out of sight. And this is part of what made Elkins so dangerous and so nearly successful. Reyna was exactly the kind of victim a killer could count on the world to overlook. She had come alone from another country. Her family was far away, in El Salvador, with no easy way to know that anything had happened to her. She was poor. She worked a factory job. She did not have a network of powerful, watchful people who would storm police stations demanding a search. In 1969, a woman like that could slip out of the world and leave barely a ripple. Elkins did not just choose to kill her. He chose someone he was betting no one would come looking for. For 30 years, that bet paid off. There is a particular cruelty in this kind of crime that is worth naming. It is not only the killing, it is the decision, made calmly and carried out over years, to deny the victim even the acknowledgement that she is gone. A body hidden this well does not just take a life. It steals the grief that should have followed, the search, the mourning, the simple fact of being missed. For 30 years, Reyna was not even allowed to be dead in the eyes of the world. She was just absent. The years passed, then the decades. Elkins eventually moved on from that house on Long Island, selling it and leaving. And when he left, he did the same thing that has undone other killers in these cases. He passed the hidden grave along with the property and told no one what was underneath. The barrel stayed exactly where he had left it, waiting for 30 years. On the 2nd of September 1999, that wait finally ended. By then, the house had new owners, people with no connection to Howard Elkins or to whatever he had buried beneath them. As people do with an old house, they were dealing with the crawl space, that low, forgotten area under the floor. And there they found it. A heavy, sealed 55-gallon drum that had no business being there. Put yourself down in that crawl space for a second. You have bought a home, an ordinary house on an ordinary street, and you are under the floor dealing with some routine chore. And there is a barrel, sealed shut, far too heavy to be empty, left behind by owners you never met. Almost no one, in that moment, reaches for the real answer, because the real answer is too monstrous to guess at. But the sheer wrongness of the thing was enough. Someone decided to open it. And a silence that had held for 30 years ended in an instant. When it was opened, the first things that came into view were almost worse for how ordinary they were. A single lady's high-heeled shoe, the kind a young woman would have worn in the late 1960s. And a human hand, gone leathery and brown, preserved rather than destroyed by the decades sealed inside. Everything was coated in a thick greenish film, the residue of chemicals and slow breakdown that had gone on inside that closed drum for a generation. What the pellets held, once it was fully understood, stopped everyone cold. Mummified human remains, the remains of a woman, and, heartbreakingly, the remains of the full-term baby she had been carrying. The medical examiner and the forensic team began the work of reading a body that had been hidden for a generation. What they could establish was stark and specific. This was a Hispanic woman, somewhere in her late 20s. She had been about 9 months pregnant, and she had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The shoe and the style of her few belongings placed her firmly in the late 1960s, which meant that whoever she was, she had been sealed inside that barrel for close to 30 years. After 30 years, Reyna Marroquín had been found, but at that moment, no one yet knew that was who she was. She was, once again, an unnamed woman, a mystery in a barrel. The question now was whether anyone could give her back her name. The answer came from something Reyna had carried with her to the very end. Inside the barrel, along with her remains, investigators found an address book. 30 years in that environment had left it badly deteriorated, but forensic techniques can do remarkable things. Under infrared light, some of the ruined pages became legible again, and on the first page was a social security number. That number belonged to Reyna Angélica Marroquín, a 27-year-old immigrant from El Salvador who had worked at Melrose Plastics. After 3 decades as a nameless body, she had her identity back, recovered from a water-damaged notebook she had kept close to her. Think of how many fragile things had to hold for that to be possible. The barrel had to stay untouched for 30 years. The new owners had to find it and to open it rather than drag it out and dump it unopened. The address book had to survive 3 decades in that ruined space, intact enough that infrared could still pull letters and numbers from its rotting pages. And Reyna herself had to have written her own social security number on that very first page. Break any single one of those links, and she stays a nameless woman in a barrel forever, her killer's secret kept for good. She was given back her name by the thinnest of margins. The detectives now had a name, but a name from 30 years earlier is a cold thing to chase. The phone numbers in that book belonged to a world that had largely moved on. People had died, or moved, or changed their lives entirely. Investigators worked those faded entries one at a time, trying to find anyone who had known the woman in the barrel while she was still alive. Eventually, one of those numbers led to Kathy Andrade, the friend who had known Reyna all those years before. And Kathy was able to tell the police the story that the bones alone could not. That Reyna had been having an affair with Howard Elkins, that she had become pregnant, that she had told his wife, and that, in the last part of her life, she had been afraid of him. Property records told their own quiet story. The house where the barrel had sat for 3 decades had once belonged to Howard Elkins, the same man who had run Melrose Plastics, the same man Kathy Andrade named as the father of Reyna's child. The barrel was industrial. The pellets inside it were the exact material his business used. Every thread pointed in one direction, toward the man who had owned the house and the barrel and the plastics company where it all began. By 1999, Howard Elkins was an old man living in Boca Raton, Florida, far from Long Island and far, he must have believed, from anything that could still touch him. Investigators found him anyway. They traveled to Florida and they sat down and questioned him about a woman named Reyna Marroquín and a barrel that had just been pulled out of a crawlspace in a house he used to own. Elkins did not confess, but he understood clearly what was closing in on him. Not long after that interview, Howard Elkins bought a gun, and he used it to take his own life in the back seat of his vehicle at a friend's home in Boca Raton. Later, DNA testing would confirm what the address book and the affair had already made plain. This was his crime. But Elkins had made his final choice. Like other men in these stories who kept their secret for decades, he reached the end of his rope only when the truth caught up, and he chose to step outside of any courtroom before it could ever judge him. He was never tried. He was never convicted. He answered to no one but himself, on his own terms. Step back and the full weight of it settles in. Reyna Marroquín was a young woman who crossed an ocean for a better life, and instead found a man who took her life and the life of her child, and then treated them both as an industrial disposal problem, packed in plastic pellets and shoved under a floor. She spent 30 years in the dark, nameless, while her killer aged comfortably into old age and died, in the end, by his own choice rather than by the hand of justice. It would be easy to call this a story about a man who got away with it, and in the legal sense, he did. But that is not the part worth carrying out of here. The part worth carrying is Reyna, because she was not in the end erased. She held on to her own name for 30 years, in a ruined little address book pressed against her, and when the moment finally came, That name spoke for her. A friend remembered her. Strangers, 30 years too late, learned who she was and what had been done to her. And a young mother who was meant to disappear into the ocean was instead lifted back into the light, named, mourned, and remembered as the person she had been all along, and not the secret a frightened man tried to turn her into.